Okay, this is the panel for Counterblasts, challenging star public intellectuals who defend empire and capital. If that's what you came to hear, you're in the right place, and if not, you might as well stay. My name is Andy Shao, and I'm an editor with Verso Books, and we're a co-sponsor of this panel. The other co-sponsor is Guernica magazine, which, if you don't know it, is, in my view, the leading online magazine at the intersection of arts and politics. Fantastic publication that puts out a lot of political thought, analysis, and reportage. Also, leading poets and fiction writers have been published and, in fact, discovered by Guernica. It's a great read, and its editor, Joel Whitney, is here with us. He'll be one of the panelists. Verso Books. We have been around for some 40 years. We like to say we're one of the leading radical publishers in the English-speaking world. We have offices in London and in Paris and here in New York now. So we publish throughout the world a wide variety of radical literature, scholarship, philosophy, history, topical stuff, some fiction, and in this case, this panel is in conjunction with a new series we've just launched, which we call Counterblasts. And the idea of the series is to is a couple things. One is to revive a kind of political publishing, pamphleteering in a sense, witty, but also tough critiques of contemporary figures, and pretty topical, pretty fast publishing. And with these three books, which we're going to talk about, we're launching the series now. So Counterblasts is, what we're doing is we're targeting a number of figures who are influential star public intellectuals. And one of the key aspects of this is that all of these folks, the folks that we're beginning our series with, are people who leverage the power of their prestige, of their scholarly reputation, of their intellectual credibility to buttress rather than to challenge empire and capital. And in the case of the three scoundrels at issue here, Thomas Friedman of the New York Times, Michael Ignatieff, the important Canadian politician and intellectual, and the wonderful Bernard-Henri Levy, France's probably most famous public intellectual. All three of them are important figures, and important liberal figures. And that's another aspect of this series that we are focusing on. We're targeting liberal intellectuals and folks who have a burnished reputation as leading progressive thinkers. And that's, in fact, a big part of what makes them important and important to us. So partly what we're also talking about, what the panelists are going to explore, is the relationship of the left to liberal intellectuals, to liberal media establishment, and that sort of thing. So they're all going to get into all of these things. I just want to say a quick word about the format. We're hoping to devote ample time to discussion with all of you. So instead of folks giving a long presentation, we're going to explore each of these figures briefly. I'm going to ask them each to introduce the creatures that they're dissecting, and then ask them a couple follow-up questions, and hopefully then we'll get like a big discussion going with all of you. That'll be the format. I'm going to introduce all three of our panelists now, and then turn it over to them. So right next to me is Derek O'Keefe, and he is the co-chair of the Canadian Peace Alliance. That's the largest anti-war organization in English Canada. And he is a founding member of StopWar.ca, which is Vancouver's citywide peace coalition. He's a former editor of a really great website called Rabble.ca, and he's the co-author of a book that he co-authored with the former Afghan MP Malalai Joya. And his book, his new book, anatomizes Michael Ignatieff, and it's called Michael Ignatieff, The Lesser Evil, and he'll explain what that means in a moment. To his right is Jade Lingard, who is a journalist for the news site Mediapart and co-editor of a book called La France Invisible. And her new book, as I said, dissects the curious case of Bernard-Henri Levy, or BHL, as we all like to call him, and, and it's called The Imposter. And then finally, Joel Whitney is with us, and as I said, he's the editor of that excellent literary and political magazine, Guernica. He's also a writer, and his writing has appeared in the New York Times, in the New Republic, the Village Voice, and other publications. His essays and reviews, and they're excellent. He's also an award-winning poet, and his poems have appeared in the Paris Review, in The Nation, and other venues. And he's partly going to talk to us about the third book in our series so far, which is written by Belen Fernandez, a really interesting, very witty writer who looks at Thomas Friedman of the New York Times, and her book is called The Imperial Messenger. And unfortunately, Belen couldn't be with us today, but Joel has run pieces by Belen in Guernica and other articles about Thomas Friedman. He knows a lot about Friedman and just the issue of going after these kinds of liberal Mandarin pundits is something that he's going to talk to us about as well. So what we're going to do here in the first round is just introduce these folks. And we'll begin with Derek.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Andy, and thanks everyone for coming out today. I know the hallways are packed. I was in quite the job navigating over here I had a panel at 10 a.m. as well, and we were discussing the anti-war movement in Europe and North America. And it's my involvement in those movements brought me into contact with the writings of Michael Ignatieff, and in particular in the months leading up to the Iraq War. I started to learn and be annoyed by the name Ignatieff. Actually, before I knew that he was a Canadian intellectual by origin, I knew him from his writings in the New York Times and elsewhere, advancing the case that George Bush and Tony Blair and others were making at the time to invade Iraq. And on the night the Iraq War started, the night of shock and awe, March 19th, just coming up on 9 years ago this week, in 2003, on the night the war started, Michael Ignatieff was hanging out with his friend, an Iraqi intellectual, Kenan Makia. And they were having dinner at Casablanca's. It's a restaurant on the Harvard campus where faculty and students hang out. So Michael Ignatieff and Kenan Makia had dinner on the night of shock and awe and compared notes. And the two of them, who were both teaching at Harvard at the time, Ignatieff occupied the prestigious Carr Center for Human Rights. He was the director of that center. Makia was faculty at Harvard as well. And the two of them were probably the most important intellectual fig leaves for the Bush administration. Makia, of course, playing the role of the native informant, the Iraqi intellectual, an intellectual version of Ahmed Chalabi, telling the Bush administration what they wanted to hear. And he is the source of Dick Cheney's intelligence that the American troops would be greeted with sweets and flowers. This intelligence came from this intellectual Makia. And Ignatieff played the role, the very important role of the liberal advocate for imperialism, which is a hundreds-year-old role. There's another Verso title that I should plug, is The Liberal Defense of Murder by Richard Seymour, which does an excellent job of tracing the whole genealogy of liberal apologia for war and empire. So in 2003, Michael Ignatieff was playing probably the key, he was probably the key person playing this role for the Bush administration because of that position at Harvard, because of his putative human rights, standing in the human rights community. So I like to think of all three of these authors that we're trying to take apart and debunk in the Counterblasts series. They play the intellectual role of that black cloth that was put up to cover Guernica at the United Nations. Do people remember this incident? It was I believe